I'm just a grandmother who once believed my son would never forget me until the day he did. I used to sit in that armchair by the window every Sunday. The same one with the floral print worn soft by time, by prayers, by memories. And every Sunday I waited, not because I liked waiting, but because I still believed this week. Maybe this week he'll remember. My son. My only child. The boy I nursed through fevers, walked to school every morning, held through heartbreaks, fed when we had nothing but rice and faith. He used to look at me like I was his whole world. Now I was nothing but an old woman in a quiet room, forgotten. The calls stopped slowly. Then the visits. Then the birthdays. He told his wife Mom needs to be around people her age now. It's better for her to be in a place where she's taken care of. And just like that, I was placed. Not chosen. Not asked. Just relocated into a nursing facility with beige walls and scheduled meals and echoes of forgotten names. The day they dropped me off, he said, "We'll visit next week?" I smiled. I wanted to believe him. That was 212 days ago. I sat in that chair every Sunday since, and every Sunday I dressed up, brushed my silver hair, put on the necklace he bought me in 1998 for Mother's Day. But no one ever came, until the day a stranger walked in. Not a nurse, not a volunteer, a man with kind eyes and a nervous smile. He brought books to read to whoever looked the loneliest. That day, I suppose, that was me. He sat beside me and said, "Mind if I read aloud?" And just like that, I was seen, not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a person. And though my son forgot me, that stranger saved me in a way I didn't even know I needed. But I'll tell you all about it. Just don't look away, because this is what it really feels like to be forgotten. And to finally be found before the silence, before the nursing home, before the bruising ache of being forgotten. I was someone. Not just a grandmother, not just a mother. I was Marie Walker. I used to run a small diner just outside town. Marie's Kitchen hand-painted sign, fresh pies every morning, and hot coffee that never stopped flowing. People came not just for the food, but for the warmth. Because I made them feel like home. I did that. I mattered. I met my husband James behind that counter. He was a postman. Came in every day at 4:15 for pie and a smile. We built a life from scratch. Laughed through hard winters. Danced in the kitchen when no one was watching. We had one child, Ethan. That boy was our world. And we gave him everything we had. James died too soon. A heart that gave too much finally gave out. And after that, I poured everything into Ethan. I worked double shifts so he could go to college. Sold my wedding ring to help with his down payment. Watched his babies when he and his wife needed space. I never complained, because that's what mothers do, right? We give, and give, and give, until there's nothing left of us but quiet hands and tired eyes. The day he suggested the nursing home, he said it with such ease. "You'll be safer there, Mom. Less stress for you. Plus, the grandkids are older now. They don't need babysitting anymore." Babysitting? Was that all I was? Not the woman who gave him life. Not the woman who stitched his Halloween costumes by hand when we couldn't afford store-bought. Not the woman who stayed up 3 nights when he broke his arm, feeding him soup and reading him stories. No, now I was just too much work. I moved in with a suitcase and a fake smile. I told myself it was fine. I'd make friends. They'd visit. He'd call. But the phone stayed cold, and my heart started forgetting how love felt, until the man with the books came. He didn't know me, but he saw me. He sat with me like I mattered. He read aloud like my ears were sacred, and when I smiled, he smiled back like it was a gift. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Because maybe, just maybe, I was still worth something, even if my own son couldn't see it anymore. The stranger came again the next week. Same time, same quiet smile, a different book. "Thought you might enjoy this one," he said. Maya Angelou. She writes about pain like it's poetry. I chuckled weakly. "I'm no poet." He looked me straight in the eyes. "You don't need to write poetry to have lived it." And I swear I felt something move inside me. Something that had been still for too long. His name was Caleb. Mid-30s. Soft-spoken. A little awkward with eye contact. but thoughtful in a way that made your heart lean in. He volunteered at the home every Thursday, reading to residents who had no visitors. Apparently, that list was long. Too long. He asked about my life, and I froze. No one had asked me that in so long. Not, "What pills are you on?" Not, "Did you eat your pudding?" But, "Tell me about you." I told him about the diner, about James, about the baby boy who used to beg me for pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. And when I paused, nervous, I was talking too much. He said something that broke me open. "You could talk for hours and I'd still be listening. Stories like yours aren't told enough." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad, but because I realized something devastatingly beautiful. I still had a voice. It had just been buried beneath years of being talked at, managed, ignored. The next Thursday, I met him in the rec room with a notebook in my hand. "Thought maybe I'd read something to you this time," I said. He smiled like I'd just handed him treasure. It wasn't perfect. My voice trembled. My hands shook. But I read him the story of my first date with James. How he slipped on mashed potatoes and still asked me to dance. Caleb laughed so loud the nurses peeked in. But more than that, he listened. And for the first time in ages, I felt alive. My son still hadn't called, still hadn't visited. But here was this stranger, showing up every week, seeing me without expectation. And it made me wonder, why is it that the people who should love us most are sometimes the first to forget we're still here? I remember sitting in that cold room, staring out the window, watching the leaves change again. It had been nearly 7 months since I last heard from my son. No calls, no visits, not even a card for Mother's Day. A nurse had brought in a little cupcake that morning, store-bought frosting, too sweet. She said, "Happy Mother's Day, darling," with a kind smile. But I wasn't her mother, and I wasn't sure I was anyone's anymore. You'd think time dulls that pain, that silence eventually becomes your normal. But no, it's sharp. Every single day, a fresh cut from someone you once carried in your body. When he was born, I held him so close. I used to kiss the top of his head and whisper, "As long as I'm alive, you'll never feel alone." What cruel irony. Because now I was the one counting cracks in the ceiling just to not feel invisible. I used to blame myself. Did I love him too much? Did I shield him so much that he never learned to see me as human? Was I just convenient? He only came around when he needed a babysitter, or when the mortgage was due, or when his wife needed a break. That last time, when they brought me here, he said, "It's for your safety, Mom. You'll be looked after. You'll have people your age." He didn't say, "We love you." He didn't say, "I'll come every week." He didn't even look back when he left. But Caleb came. He always came. One afternoon, I was quiet. He noticed. "You're somewhere else today," he said softly. And I just broke. I whispered, "How does a child forget their own mother?" He didn't answer with cliches or pity. He didn't try to fix it. He just held space, let my pain breathe. Then he said, "Some people forget. Some pretend to forget. But some of us remember for them." I cried that day, not out of weakness, but release, because someone had finally seen me. I started writing more stories, letters never sent, dreams I once had, anger I wasn't proud of, hope I didn't want to lose. My words were messy, raw, sometimes angry, but they were mine. And every Thursday, I read them aloud to Caleb. And every Thursday, he told me I mattered. Somewhere in those pages, somewhere between grief and gratitude, I started to come back to life. Not because of my son, but in spite of him. There's a strange kind of freedom in hitting emotional rock bottom. You no longer feel the need to explain your sadness. You stop pretending you're okay for the sake of appearances. And most importantly, you stop apologizing for feeling forgotten. That was the day everything shifted for me. It was a Wednesday. The air smelled like weak hospital coffee and disinfectant. The nurses were chatting down the hall. I sat in the corner of the common room, folding and unfolding the same napkin over and over. A volunteer group came by to sing old songs. They sang, "You Are My Sunshine." And I cracked. Because for years, I was the sunshine. I was the warmth. And no one even noticed when I was gone. That night, I wrote a letter, not to my son, But to myself, dear me, you did your best. You gave your life to raising a family that forgot your name when they didn't need anything. But you're still here. You still love. You still breathe. And from this moment on, you don't owe anyone an apology for existing. I read that letter aloud to Caleb the next day. He listened without blinking. Then something unexpected happened. He stood up and he clapped. "That's the woman I see," he said. "The one who forgot she's allowed to stop shrinking." I started changing things after that. I wore red lipstick again, even though I thought I was too old for it. I stopped answering every phone call, hoping it was my son. I started saying no to things that drained me. And yes to little joys. Crochet group, yes. Jazz night, yes. Eating dessert before dinner, why not? But most of all, I stopped hoping for an apology that would never come. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. Stopped dreaming of reconciliation that lived only in fantasy. I chose peace over closure. And Caleb, he cheered me on. He said, "Sometimes your real family isn't who shares your blood. It's who sees your soul." And you know what? He was right. I wasn't a forgotten mother anymore. I was a woman rising back into herself. There's a saying I once read, "Family isn't always blood. It's the people who show up when it matters." And Caleb, he kept showing up. At first, it was little things. He brought me chamomile tea instead of the bitter green they usually served. He asked me about the books I used to love. He even sat beside me in the garden and asked how the air felt on my skin that morning. No one had asked me how I felt in years, only what I could do for them. But Caleb, he didn't see me as someone who needed pity. He saw me as someone who needed to be seen. One afternoon, we were sitting beneath the only blooming tree in the courtyard. The sun filtered through the branches like soft lace. I looked at him and asked, "Why do you care so much, Caleb?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a folded photo from his wallet. A woman, beautiful, aging, kind eyes smiled from it. "That's my grandmother," he said. "She raised me. She passed last year. I wasn't there when she died. I was too busy trying to fix my life. I never got to say thank you." His voice cracked. "So maybe helping you? Maybe it's how I tell her I'm sorry." In that moment, something clicked between us. He had pain he carried like a shadow, and I had loneliness that sat in my chest like a brick. Together we began to heal. The staff started calling us the odd pair. I didn't mind. Caleb would sneak me chocolate. I'd scold him like a child. He'd read poetry aloud in the evenings. I'd pretend I didn't like it, but my eyes betrayed me. We shared stories. I told him about the Christmas I saved every dollar to buy my son a bicycle he never remembered. He told me about the time he lost everything, but still got up the next day. I started smiling again, laughing again, believing again. Not because my son came back, he didn't, but because a stranger gave me something I thought I'd lost forever: dignity. Some nights, when the lights dimmed and the halls were quiet, Caleb would whisper, "You're stronger than you know, Grandma. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." I believed him. For the first time in decades, I believed I was worth loving, even if the love didn't come from where I expected. It had been months since I'd heard from my son. No calls, no letters, no guilt. And honestly, I'd stopped waiting. But Caleb, in his gentle way, nudged open a door I thought I'd sealed shut. "Why don't you write him?" he said one afternoon, sliding a notepad across my lap. I stared at the blank page. What could I say to a man who had erased me? Still, something inside me stirred. Not for him, but for me. I needed to speak even if no one was listening. So I wrote, "Dear Andrew, I don't know if you care. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I'm writing anyway, because my silence has screamed for too long. You left me in that nursing home like luggage you didn't want to carry. No explanation, no hug, not even a backward glance. You used to call me Mommy when you were scared of the dark. Now I sit alone in the dark and you're nowhere to be found. But this isn't a letter of blame. This is a letter of release. I forgive you. Not because you asked, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I don't know what kind of man you've become. I don't even know if you think of me, but I think of you less with pain now and more with clarity. I raised you with love. I gave you everything, but I will not let your absence define the rest of my days. I am more than what you left behind. I am rising. I am healing. And I am finally living. Goodbye, son. Or maybe hello to someone I'll never know again. Mom. I folded the letter, sealed it, and never mailed it. Instead, I burned it in the garden's little fire pit, watching the edges curl into ashes. Not out of anger, out of freedom. That day, I didn't lose a son. I gained myself. Caleb saw me returning from the garden and asked, "How do you feel?" I looked up at him, smiled gently, and said, "Lighter." And I meant it. The chains of resentment had finally fallen. I was no longer tethered to the hope that Andrew would come back, because I had already come back to myself. Every Sunday morning, Caleb would come by with 2 cups of coffee, 1 black for him, 1 with just a hint of cream for me, and a bag of blueberry muffins from that little bakery on Maple Street. It became our ritual. We didn't speak much at first. We didn't have to. There was a comfort in the silence between us. But that morning, 2 weeks after I burned the letter, I felt different. Open. Stronger. Ready. So I told him about my wedding day, about how Andrew used to sneak chocolate chip cookies before dinner, about the time I nearly gave up on life and how a stranger at a diner once gave me a reason not to. Funny how strangers are sometimes the only ones who see us, I said, looking out the window. Caleb didn't respond right away. He just sipped his coffee, nodding slowly. Then he said something I'll never forget. Maybe it's because we meet them when we're no longer pretending. That hit me. Because it was true. With Andrew, with my late husband, even with my neighbors, I had spent years pretending to be okay. Pretending I didn't hurt. Pretending I didn't feel used or invisible. But with Caleb, I was just me. An old woman with messy memories and fragile hopes. And that was enough. Later that day, we walked to the park. The trees were losing their leaves, and I felt the crisp breeze wrap around my shoulders like an old friend. We sat on a bench watching children chase each other in the distance. Caleb turned to me and asked, "Did you ever dream of running away?" I laughed. Not the fake kind. The deep belly laugh I hadn't felt in years. "Every day for 30 years, I replied. He smiled. "Then maybe it's time you stop running from something and start walking towards something." That night, I wrote those words down in my journal. Stop running from, start walking toward. And I began to wonder, what was I walking toward? I didn't know yet, but for the first time in decades, I was excited to find out. It was late November when Andrew showed up at my door again. No warning, no call. Just the sound of a car engine, the creak of the gate, and his hesitant knock. 3 soft raps that seemed to carry a lifetime of guilt. I opened the door slowly, not knowing what I'd feel. Joy, anger, relief. Instead, I felt nothing. He looked older, tired, not like the boy I had raised, nor the man who left me behind. Just a shadow of both. "Hi, Mom," he said. And for the first time in years, I didn't say, "Come in." Instead, I stood there, letting the silence speak, letting him squirm in it. "I heard you were staying with someone named Caleb," he finally said. I nodded. "Yes, he's been kind." Andrew looked down, ashamed. I didn't know what else to do. Things got hard after Dad died. I lost the business, the house. Michelle left. I couldn't take care of everything. He was trying to justify abandoning me, trying to package up years of silence in a single sentence. But I wasn't interested in excuses anymore. "You didn't have to take care of everything, Andrew," I said quietly. "Just one thing, me. And you couldn't even do that." He looked like he might cry. And a small part of me wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him it was okay. But it wasn't. And I wasn't the same mother who used to clean his messes, emotional or otherwise. "I just wanted to see if you were okay," he mumbled, turning to leave. As he walked away, I called after him. "Andrew, I still love you." He stopped in his tracks, but didn't turn around. "But I don't need you anymore." And with that, I closed the door. That night, I sat with Caleb by the fireplace. "I think that was closure," I said. Caleb nodded, handing me a mug of tea. Closure doesn't always mean reconciliation, he replied. Sometimes it just means no longer needing answers. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. I had said my piece. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Weeks passed after Andrew's visit, and though I kept up my routines, afternoon tea with Caleb, tending to my little herb garden, and the occasional walk to the church, I felt a lingering ache. Not pain, not regret, just a quiet emptiness. Like a room where the furniture had been rearranged, and you kept bumping into the ghost of what used to be. One night, I sat at my little desk by the window and began to write a letter I never intended to send. Dear Andrew, I carried you for 9 months, but I've carried your silence for years. I gave you my strength when you were weak, my time when you had none, my prayers when you stopped believing in yourself. And when you left me, forgot me, I didn't just lose a son. I lost the woman I was when I believed I mattered. But I want you to know I found her again, not because of your return, but because of your absence. Caleb didn't replace you. He reminded me that I am not disposable, that kindness exists even outside of blood, that I still have something beautiful to give and to receive. I forgive you not because you asked me to, but because I need peace. Goodbye, my son, not forever, but goodbye to the version of you that left me behind. Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer under an old photograph of Andrew as a boy before the world made him hard. Then I walked outside to the mailbox where something unexpected waited for me. A card. From Caleb. Even though he lived under the same roof, he had written to me. Handwritten on thick cream paper. Maggie, you don't know this, but I watched you from my window the day your son left again. And I saw something most people miss. Strength cloaked in softness. A woman saying I love you, not because she's weak, but because she's free. I've met many people in my life who've survived storms, but you learned to dance in the rain. You inspire me. If you'll let me, I'd like to be more than the man who offered you shelter. I'd like to be the one who walks beside you for the rest of your journey. With deep admiration, Caleb. I clutched the letter and cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time, someone had truly seen me. The maid, the mother, the forgotten. The woman who said no. The woman who rose. The morning after Caleb's letter, the world felt quieter, like even the birds were holding their breath. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, the one with the faded rose print, holding the card over and over, rereading every word like a prayer. I had never imagined someone would want me not for what I could do, not for what I could clean, cook, or fix, but for simply existing. Just Maggie. Just me. Caleb wasn't waiting for an answer. He had gone about his day like he always did, gentle, patient, never pressuring. And maybe that's why it was so easy to give him one. At lunch, I made something simple but heartfelt, chicken soup like my mother used to make. And when I placed the bowl in front of him, I sat across the table instead of walking away. I got your letter, I said softly. He looked up, worry flickering in his eyes, and he asked. I smiled. I don't dance much anymore, Caleb, but I think I'd like to try. His shoulders dropped in relief, and his face lit up like a boy's. Then, I'll be honored to be your partner. We didn't talk much more that day. We didn't need to. Sometimes the quiet between two people says more than 1,000 poems. Later that evening, we sat on the porch with 2 cups of tea, watching the sun fall behind the trees. I looked at him and said, Do you ever think we meet the right people at exactly the wrong time? He shook his head gently. No, I think the time was always right. We just had to become the people who could recognize it. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. And when I woke up, I didn't feel old or discarded or invisible. I felt chosen. But peace, like any garden, must be tended. And just when I thought my story had shifted into its softer chapters, a knock came at the door that made my breath catch. I opened it to find my son Andrew. Again, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman I didn't recognize. Young, nervous, holding a baby. Mom, Andrew said, his voice rough. This is Sarah, and this is Emma, my granddaughter. For a moment, the world stood still. I didn't know where else to go, he added. She kicked me out, said I was becoming someone she didn't recognize. His eyes, once so cold, were now hollow. I think I need help. I looked at the baby, then back at him. This was the part in the story where some might close the door. But my story wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about boundaries and healing. I'll make some tea, I said, but you'll need to listen this time. Because I wasn't the same woman he once walked away from. As the kettle hissed behind me, I stared at the 2 teacups on the counter side by side, one old and chipped, the other newer, barely used. It felt symbolic somehow. 2 different lives, 2 different stories, but now oddly side by side again. Andrew sat at the table, elbows resting on his knees, his head hanging low. The woman, Sarah, held the baby gently, but her eyes kept darting around, unsure of her place. And me, I took a long breath and walked in with quiet resolve. I placed the tea down without a word. Then I sat. I looked at the child, Emma, her cheeks chubby, her eyes wide, and unaware of the storm of history in that small room. She cooed. Funny how a baby's sound can be a balm and a blade all at once. I'm not angry anymore. I began, my voice steady. But I'm not blind either. Andrew lifted his head slowly, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, shame. Maybe even regret. I was a mother to you, I said. And when I became a grandmother, I prayed that I'd get to do it all over again. But instead, I became the maid, the burden, the afterthought. Andrew's face crumbled and Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I didn't see it, Andrew whispered. I didn't want to see it. I nodded. You chose not to, and that's something you have to live with. But I've done enough living for other people, so if you're here looking for a clean slate, you'll have to do the sweeping yourself. The silence after that was thick, heavy with years of unspoken wounds. But Sarah, braver than I gave her credit for, spoke. Mrs. Hart, she said softly, I've heard about you. Only bits and pieces. But seeing this house, feeling the warmth here, I know now. You didn't deserve what happened. Her voice cracked, and neither does she. She looked down at Emma, rocking her gently. I'm leaving him, she said suddenly. I just needed to see where the good came from before I took the baby and walked. Andrew gasped. Sarah. She cut him off. You gave up on your mother. I won't let you give up on your daughter. And just like that, my kitchen, my quiet, warm kitchen, became a courtroom of consequences. I reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. You're stronger than I was at your age, I said. And that little girl, she'll know love because of you. Sarah cried. Emma cooed again. And Andrew, he finally wept. Not the crocodile tears of manipulation, but the ragged, hollow sobs of someone who had finally painfully recognized the damage he caused. By the end of the day, Sarah and Emma stayed. Andrew didn't. He left with his head low, his heart maybe cracked open for the first time in decades. I watched him walk away through the window, and I didn't feel angry or broken or lesser. I felt whole because for the first time, my story wasn't about who left. It was about who chose to stay. The following days were quiet but not empty. Sarah and little Emma stayed in the guest room. I offered it with no conditions, and Sarah accepted with no prideful resistance. There was an unspoken understanding between us 2 women who had been underestimated, overlooked, and still somehow found the strength to stand. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of Emma's little feet kicking in her crib. Sarah insisted on helping with breakfast, and though she wasn't used to cooking from scratch, she learned quickly. I taught her how to bake cornbread the way my grandmother taught me. She showed me how to use the smart TV remote without pressing 5 wrong buttons. We were building something, but something else was building to trust. Late one evening, after Emma had gone down and the tea was still warm, Sarah sat across from me on the sofa and said softly, I don't know how to start over. I looked into her eyes and smiled gently. Then don't start over. Just start from here. She told me her story that night. The real one. About the verbal jabs that became threats. About the isolation. The manipulation. The fear. And then she said something that struck me so deeply I had to hold back tears. "I would have stayed," she whispered, "if I hadn't heard about you. About the woman who raised him with nothing but grace and still ended up discarded. It terrified me. I didn't want that to be my ending." I closed my eyes. She continued, "I knew if I stayed, Emma might grow up thinking it's okay to be small, to be used to be silent. And I'd rather be a single mom with empty pockets than a silent wife with a full house and an empty soul." I reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze. "You're not alone," I said. "And you're not small." Word eventually got out. Old neighbors stopped by surprised to see life in the house again. Some brought pies, others brought awkward apologies. One woman even said, "We always wondered why your son didn't visit more." I just smiled. "Now you know." But I didn't dwell on bitterness anymore. I had no room for it. My heart was finally full with something warmer. One afternoon, while Sarah was out applying for jobs, I rocked Emma to sleep on the porch. Her tiny hand clutched my sweater, her breathing soft and steady. And I thought to myself, this right here is what healing looks like. Not in loud declarations or angry goodbyes, but in the quiet moments of love that come after. I wasn't her grandmother by blood, but I was something maybe more powerful. The woman who made sure she grew up in a home filled with dignity, not demands. And in some strange, full-circle way, she was healing the part of me that had once been so deeply wounded. One chilly Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sarah was out with Emma running errands, and I had just sat down with a cup of chamomile and the last slice of banana bread. When I opened the door, the past stood there dressed in regret. It was my son, Jason. His hair was a little grayer, his posture a little heavier, but those were just surface details. What struck me most was the look in his eyes, hollow lost, and maybe, just maybe ashamed. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't say anything at first. I just stepped aside and let him in. He stood in the living room as if it belonged to someone else. Maybe it did now. He looked around, noticed the framed photos of Emma on the shelf, Sarah's sweater draped on the armchair, the soft light of a lived-in home. "You've redecorated," he mumbled. I nodded. Had to. Too many ghosts in the old setup. He gave a faint, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, I guess I'm one of them." I sat down, motioned for him to do the same, and for a few seconds, we both just breathed. Nothing more. Then he spoke. "Sarah left. Took Emma. I haven't seen them in months. He paused, then added, "I didn't know they came here." I didn't confirm or deny. He continued, "I lost the house. Got laid off. The divorce finalized last week. I'm not proud of how things went, Mom. I needed to talk to someone who remembers me when I wasn't such a mess." I looked at him, my own son, and tried to find the little boy I once held in my arms. The one who used to bring me wildflowers and drawings of stick figures labeled Mom. And for a fleeting second, I saw him. But then I remembered the years of silence. The holidays I spent alone. The way he had treated me not just with neglect, but with entitlement. Like I was furniture. Like I didn't matter. So I spoke. "You came back because you're hurting. Not because you suddenly remembered I'm your mother." He looked like I slapped him, but he didn't argue. "I will always be the woman who gave you life, Jason," I said. "But I had to fight for mine back. And I won't lose it again, not to guilt, not to pity, not even to you." He nodded, eyes brimming. "I understand," he whispered. "I just needed to say I'm sorry." I stood up. "Then say it, and go." He did. With tears in his eyes and more humility than I ever thought I'd see from him. When Sarah came home, she noticed the quiet in the room. "Was that him?" I nodded. "Did he?" He apologized. She waited, and I let him. Then I turned to her with a small, peaceful smile. But I didn't let him stay. We both knew the meaning behind that. This home, our home, was no longer a place where people like him could just walk in and rewrite the story. That chapter was closed. What came next was ours. The wind outside rustled the trees as twilight painted golden streaks across the living room wall. I sat on my favorite chair, a blanket draped over my knees, and watched the light fade peacefully fully. In that silence, I thought about all the versions of myself I had been. The girl who grew up dreaming of love, the young wife who swallowed her voice to keep peace, the mother who gave and gave until she forgot what it felt like to be held, the forgotten woman in a nursing home, invisible even to her own son, and then the woman who was saved, not by a prince, not by family, but by a stranger's kindness, by her own quiet strength, and by a choice to say no more. This wasn't just my story. It was a story for every woman who ever felt discarded, whoever felt like she was just background noise in someone else's life. But I chose to become the narrator, the author, and now I choose to live the ending on my terms. Sarah and Emma came into the room. Emma crawled onto my lap, her little head resting against my shoulder. "Grandma," she whispered, "tell me a story." I kissed her hair and smiled. "How about one about a woman who found her voice after being silenced for years?" Sarah gave me a knowing glance. Emma nodded, and so I began. This is the story of a woman who was treated like a maid until she finally said no. Sometimes the most powerful word you'll ever say is one you were always afraid to. And sometimes saying no is the beginning of your greatest yes. Yes to peace. Yes to self-worth. Yes to being seen not as a servant, but as a soul. So to every mother, grandmother, or woman who has ever been forgotten, overlooked, or used, you are not what they did to you. You are what you rise from. You are the strength they never saw coming. And I hope you remember, even when they take everything, your spirit is yours forever. If you've ever felt invisible in your own story, if you've ever quietly carried the weight of sacrifice while the world kept asking for more, then this story is for you. What would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments, and never forget, you deserve love, dignity, and a life that belongs to you.